Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship Podcast, recapping Texas's 34-27 win at Kansas State. That's right. Texas has finally won a true road game, snapping a 5-game losing streak on the road in true hostile environments. I am Chip Brown of Horns, 247.com, joined as always by the managing editor of Horns 24/7, Taylor Estes. Taylor, I am sitting in the press box here in Manhattan, Kansas, looking over an empty Bill Snyder Family Stadium, and the Texas Longhorns, as they usually do, put on a dominant first half, got up 31-10 at halftime. Bijan Robinson running it all over the Kansas State Wildcat defense. And then that second half Longhorn team showed up and turned the ball over and started committing penalties and got outscored 17-3. But Keandre Coburn, snacks, knocked the ball out of Adrian Martinez's hand as Kansas State was trying to drive for the game-tying or potentially go-ahead points. And Jalen Ford recovered that fumble with 24 seconds left, and Texas gets out of Manhattan with their Big 12 title game hopes still alive, Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Chip, that, it was kind of the way that it's gone a lot for Texas under Steve Sarkisian, the tale of two halves, right? The first half comes out dominant, has a 31-10 lead going into halftime over number 13 ranked Kansas State. And then it's like the ability or lack thereof to score points in the second half started to show up and rear its ugly head a little bit again. But you have to give a lot of kudos, I think, right after this game to the Texas defense. I mean, I know that some fans were not too thrilled with some of the coverage, some of the plays on defense. But at the end of the day, the defense is the reason why Texas won this game. I mean, 10 points given up in the first half against, a top 15 ranked Kansas State team that just shut out Oklahoma State 48-0 the week prior to this game. Texas watched that happen. And, I know that they did end up giving up 27 points, but at the end of the day, the fact that Texas was outscored 17 points to 3 points in the second half and still managed to make enough plays on defense to come out with a win should not be overlooked. And this is something that, I feel like this was a needed game, a needed win, obviously, as you mentioned, keep the Big 12 title hopes alive. I kind of feel like it's crazy we're talking about that, honestly, at this point of the season, because there's still some very difficult games ahead for Texas. But a win is a win, and you got to take them where you can get them, especially on the road, which do not come easily, it seems, under Steve Sarkisian. And this was a huge win on the road against a number 13 ranked team in the college football playoff rankings. That's not something to overlook. I feel like all things considered wasn't perfect, but at the end of the day, like, you have to walk away if you're a Texas fan with your head held high and looking at the fact that somehow, after the losses to Texas Tech, after the losses to Oklahoma State, Texas is still in contention for a Big 12 title spot. And that's something I don't think that many people would have thought would be on the table after that Oklahoma State loss in the end of October, Chip.
Yeah, and I agree with you. The defense came up with two massive stops in the red zone. Ryan Watts with a huge tackle on third down after K-State had driven to the Texas 4, and they, after a double-digit play drive that took 6 minutes and 30 seconds off the clock, they have to settle for a short field goal. And then Jahdae Barron with a huge pass breakup in the end zone on a fourth down play from the Texas 16 and played through the hands of Phillip Brooks, the receiver. K-State fans were yelling for pass interference because Barron didn't turn around, but he played through the hands of Phillip Brooks perfectly, broke up the pass because Brooks had it in his hands. Jahdae Barron breaks up that pass, and that was enormous because that was another double-digit play drive that took more than 3 minutes off the clock. So 2 of K-State's best drives in the first half ended in only 3 points. And that was enormous because obviously the way Texas came out in the second half, it was just so weird, Taylor, because they didn't have a single penalty in the first half. They were playing clean. Jalen Ford had a great interception right toward the end of the first half that set up another touchdown with only seconds left. It was, you couldn't have drawn up a better first half for Texas, and they go in up 31-10, but then they come out in the second half, and the offense turns the ball over. Xavier Worthy gets hammered after catching a 16-yard pass on 3rd and 9. He gets hit by K-State's safety and fumbles the ball, and then it was just one penalty after another. And the worst was K-State had just committed 2 penalties on one play and was facing 1st and 35. And 2 plays later, Jaron Thompson gets flagged for a personal foul completely away from the play, after the play, automatic first down for K-State. And K-State scores after that. And then there were false starts on the offense. Every possession, the first 2 possessions Texas had in the second half had false starts. Texas couldn't overcome them. They had a miserable third quarter. Bijan Robinson, who ran 15 times for 161 yards in the first half, ran 15 times for 55 yards in the second half. I thought Steve Sarkisian kind of lost his rhythm as a play caller in the second half. And you're just gripping. If you're a Texas fan, you're watching this 17-3 K-State landslide happening, and you're like, oh my God, it's going to happen again. And then, the Texas offense goes 3 and out. And Daniel Trejo, maybe with the play of the game, a 55-yard punt that forces K-State to have to, start on that final drive deep in their own territory. They got to midfield, but then Keandre Coburn steps up, smacks that ball out of Adrian Martinez's hand. And Jalen Ford said, I saw that ball on the ground, and I just was like, just get on the ball and make sure it doesn't go anywhere, because Texas had kind of booted around a couple of other fumbles in the game, and K-State recovered them. So it was just, you could hear the locker room, Taylor. The post-game press conferences were right next to the locker room. That locker room was insane. The Texas players were going berserk, and rightfully so. It was a huge hurdle for this team to finally win on the road, to not blow another lead, and set up this showdown next Saturday against undefeated TCU in Austin next Saturday night.
Yeah, that's I think the biggest thing that you have to take away is you can look at the issues, you can look at the mistakes, you can look at the missed opportunities that Texas had. At the end of the day, they made the plays when they needed to make them most. There were a number of times where the ball was on the ground and Texas did not recover the ball. The one that went out of bounds when Barron Sorrell and I believe it was Tavondre Sweat in the fourth quarter, the ball was on the ground. They're both trying to recover the fumble and they knock it out of bounds to have K-State to still be able to have possession of the ball. And then, as that quarter wore on, then Texas did make that play. Keandre Coburn made a huge strip, of that ball. And, and there were uncharacteristic plays, I think, also from the Texas offense, too. Roschon Johnson has never fumbled a ball in his entire career at Texas in 4 years. And how many games that guy has played in? Him and Bijan Robinson, according to Steve Sarkisian, are his 2 most reliable people. When there's a situation where the game's on the line, or if there's just a play where he knows that he needs to get the ball and the people that he's going to trust, he gets the ball in their hands. And Roschon Johnson, was stripped. It was a great play by the Kansas State defense in order to strip that ball. But the fact that these type of things went against Texas on the road against the number 13 ranked team in the country, a team that really, I mean, I don't know if Kansas State has been given enough credit, to be honest, for what they've done this season. I mean, everyone saw that loss to Tulane and was like, oh gosh, Kansas State sucks. And it's like, well, Tulane's in the top 25. So I don't think that, like hindsight's 2020, or I obviously, but like this is a really good K-State team. This is a Kansas State team that does not make penalties, and they were penalized 9 times in this game at home. It's one thing if you're on the road and you have the hostile environment working against you. It's another thing when you're at home and you get 9 penalties, especially for a team that's one of the least penalized teams in the Big 12, one of the least penalized teams in college football. I mean, these were things that, Texas really did take advantage of when it mattered most. And I would say that the biggest thing, I know, people are going to look at the stat sheet, what Texas gave up 468 yards and 27 points. So if people look at the stat sheet, they're going to be like, oh, the defense didn't come to play. The defense came to play, and they came to play when it mattered most. And these whole talks about the Texas defense being in shambles or fire Pete Kwiatkowski or this defensive scheme's not working, you can't say it at this point. I mean, the defense is not the reason why this team can't score points in the third quarter, and so the fact that Texas did overcome that hurdle, did end up leaving Bill Snyder Family Stadium with a win, especially when every road game in the Big 12 that they've had, when they've had those leads, they ended up losing the games. This is a huge hurdle, and they needed it the most. I mean, Steve Sarkisian, we kind of talked about this, Chip, even prior to the month of November. Mac Brown used to have this when he was head coach of Texas. He used to have this banner when you walked out of the tunnel from Moncrief onto the football field in November. They would hang it every November, and it said, "People remember November." And Steve Sarkisian's been talking about that this is the month that really matters the most. And he said that he needs the most out of his team the next 30 days of November. And I think this is a really good start for what lies ahead. And they're going to need to definitely capitalize on any momentum that they can gain for this when they face undefeated TCU next weekend at home.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there was some interesting injury situations going into this game. Obviously, Anthony Cook, who had the broken left forearm, he had his arm in a cast with a pad over it. He played in this game. Adrian Martinez and Will Howard, that was the big debate going into this game. Will Howard red hot in against TCU before he got injured in that game, and then led Kansas State to the 48-0 victory over Oklahoma State a week ago. Well, it was Adrian Martinez, the better runner, and Texas was able to put the first interception of Martinez's season on him in this game. Jalen Ford with a huge interception, like I said, right before the end of the first half, led to a touchdown for Texas. Martinez also obviously gave up the fumble to end the game. And so K-State fans will have to wonder if Will Howard, might have had more success. But Adrian Martinez finishes 24 of 36 passing for 329 yards, 2 touchdowns, and the 1 interception. And he ran 14 times for 52 yards and a touchdown as well. So, Texas comes through, turns him over when they needed it most. And Quinn Ewers, Taylor, we talked about what a big game this was for him, to a grow-up game for him after the miserable performance, his worst performance, probably going back to middle school at Oklahoma State. He needed to come and settle down and deliver the goods, and he finishes 18 of 31 passing for 197 yards. And Xavier Worthy only caught 2 passes for 16 yards. And he ended up with 4 catches for 42 yards. But for a while, he only had 2 catches for 16 yards, and they were both touchdowns. And now Xavier Worthy has 21 touchdown catches in 21 games played. That is amazing. So Xavier Worthy, you can say all he does is score touchdowns. But Quinn Ewers got off to a nice start, had a really nice third down completion to Jatavian Sanders with good touch. He was really good with the wind in the second quarter when Texas, took control of the game and went up 31-10. So Quinn Ewers getting it done, and Bijan Robinson, as we said, 30 carries, 209 yards. Bijan Robinson said that the coaches told him early in the week, we're going to run the ball, so be ready. And he was. And Roschon Johnson, like you said, Taylor, an unbelievable play by Echo Boydo, the K-State DB who runs down Roschon Johnson and timed his punch on the ball perfectly to knock it out of Roschon Johnson's hands, causing a fumble deep in K-State territory that Kansas State recovered. Roschon Johnson was disgusted with himself going off the field after that play, but that was a great play by
It was.
Echo Boydo. And Texas overcame adversity tonight, and that is the biggest thing. And Quinn Ewers said it. He said, we definitely, I guess, overcame a block. And he said big credit to the defense and Keandre Coburn for coming up with that fumble at the end of the game. He said it was a huge play, and it was. And the Texas defense was sort of the unsung hero throughout this game with the big plays in the red zone to limit K-State on those two just enormous drives. K-State had 10 minutes worth of drives into Texas's red zone that resulted in only 3 points. Thought that was huge. So the Texas defense just kept answering when they had to.
Yeah, and also this is a Texas defense that, Anthony Cook did not start the game. He did come in, but he has a broken arm. I mean, say what you will, he's the secondary has been pretty good, but the depth has been the issue in the secondary. And when your most reliable safety is not starting and is coming off the bench with a broken arm, I mean, you can say what you want about, wanting to have the next guy ready, all of that. Well, that's not the case for Texas. Michael Taff, a walk-on, was playing a lot of snaps in place of Anthony Cook. And the fact that they were able to make those plays when it really mattered most just was so huge. And when you talk about Roschon Johnson's fumble, I mean, when that happened, I was like, no way, like no way. But it was such a good play by the Kansas State defensive back. Like you cannot blame Roschon on that. I mean, this is a guy that protects the ball at all costs. I mean, it's kind of like Bijan Robinson against Texas Tech, like that was a very uncharacteristic fumble that Bijan Robinson had in, overtime against Texas Tech in that loss in Lubbock. But it was like, we can blame Bijan Robinson, or you can acknowledge that the fact that the defensive player made a huge play. And that's really what it was. Chip, before we continue on here, let's just take a really quick break. But we have plenty more, obviously, to talk about when Texas picked up their first road win of the season, the second road win under Steve Sarkisian, and the 34-27 win at Kansas State. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will continue on here. But Chip, I would say one thing that it's a little bit of a head scratcher, I would say, at this point when it comes to how Texas plays. They're the tale of two halves, between the first half and the second half. And I think the one thing that a lot of Texas fans, even after a lot of these wins, if you go back to like Iowa State, this one obviously against Kansas State, there's a number of wins that it's almost like some Texas fans are like few, but like kind of like angry after the way that the second half has kind of played out. Steve Sarkisian didn't really acknowledge it much in the his or in his post game press conference, but I feel like that's something that you can't do if you have this stretch of games ahead of you. When you have TCU coming up at home, I think Texas does have a little bit of an advantage just for the sheer fact that Gary Patterson's on the staff. If anybody knows how to pick apart or dismantle Max Duggan and the TCU offense, it's going to be Gary Patterson, because he recruited a lot of those players. He coached, he was the head coach there for however many years, like what, 20 some years, but for every single year that Max Duggan until this year, was a quarterback there. But this is still a really tough stretch. And at some point, the second half woes have to end. I mean, this was a good starting point, but it doesn't make me feel like great moving forward with the slate ahead. I mean, this is a team that still has to go on the road at Kansas, which just beat Oklahoma State and became bowl eligible for the first time in 2008. I mean, Texas and Kansas became bowl eligible on the same day. We never thought that was going to be the case this season, right? I mean, if anybody told me that before the season started, I'd be like, you're out of your mind. I mean, it's just, but that's actually what is ahead for Texas. And at some point, Steve Sarkisian's got to make some sort of adjustments to stop this, because I feel like it's just putting so much pressure on his defense, so much pressure on his defensive staff. And honestly, when he goes into protection mode, it puts so much pressure on the offense too, because it's like, we have 3 plays to make something happen. Otherwise, we're going to be punting the ball. And that's exactly kind of what happens week in and week out, especially on the road, especially, having leads against these teams. I mean, what was your take, I would say, about what Steve Sarkisian said after the game and what he said about the second half?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, he definitely focused on the win in a tough environment, and how the team has more to do, was his quote. Talking about the month of November and what a big month it's going to be. But there's no doubt that he got out of rhythm as a play caller, and part of that was the false starts on the first 2 drives of the second half, putting Texas behind the chains. And it was an array of different players with the false start. Jaleel Billingsley, and the linemen. I didn't know what they were doing in terms of the running plays late in the game when there was only 4 minutes left. Where was the power? They did run power. In fact, that was the touchdown run that Bijan Robinson had, the 36-yard touchdown run. And I'm like, okay, cool. New wrinkle. Last week against Oklahoma State, or 2 weeks ago, it was the counter play, which you can run a number of different ways. And Bijan Robinson told us on Monday he loves the counter play. So run the counter play out of all the different formations and ways that you can run the counter play. But heck, I'll take the power play. It was, Cole Hudson pulls, and Shatavian Sanders with the kick out block, and boom, Bijan Robinson gone 36 yards for the touchdown. And then in the second half, it was just a lot of outside zone. And then even in that final 4 minutes, they run a toss sweep, which, K-State's showing blitz, and that probably wasn't the play. They were showing blitz off the edge, which they ended up doing, and they blew it up for a 5-yard loss. And I don't know, Taylor, it is a little frustrating, because it just seems like the creativity goes out of the offensive playbook in the second half of these games, and they don't try to find different ways to run, the power and the counter that Bijan Robinson loves so much. So, I was wrong. I said that Bijan ran 15 times for 55. He ran 15 times for 48 yards in the second half. I mean, Steve Sarkisian, after running 15 times for 161 yards in the first half, it can't fall off like that. And so you're right. I mean, there's more mirror in the mirror conversations that Steve Sarkisian needs to have to figure out how to unlock this offense and not score 3 points in the second half. They need to be a team that, puts it all together in the second half. That's what TCU has done all year. TCU has trailed in the second half of games and come back to win them. Texas has led big early in games, or in the third quarter of games. In fact, all 5 of the losses Texas had in true road games leading up to this one, they'd had double-digit leads in the second half, and most of them leads into the fourth quarter and found ways to lose. And so to hear Quinn Ewers say we definitely, got through a block of not giving up a lead and winning on the road. Let's see if this maybe, gets these guys to play with a little more confidence in the second half of games instead of looking like they're just trying to hang on and put the game in peril, because that's what it felt like. I mean, it felt like Texas made this game exciting for all the wrong reasons. And huge kudos to win it. But good gravy. There was K-State at midfield with a chance to driving for the game tying or game winning touchdown. So um, there is work to be done. There's definitely work to be done. But you know what? These guys are so excited about going home and playing TCU. DeMarvion Overshone said, anytime you get a chance to put the first L on a team, he said, you're very excited. And he said the DKR is going to be rocking next Saturday. So Texas is going to have most likely a great week of practice. They're going to be totally focused. I bet we see an effort similar to Alabama. The whole country is going to be watching. And here comes TCU undefeated. And so it's going to be fascinating. But you're right. Then they got to go to Kansas. And I'm sure Jalen Daniels will be healthy and raring to go. And we know all about Jalen Daniels. But first things first, right, Taylor?
Yeah.
Enjoy the win for 24 hours, and then tomorrow get to work on TCU.
Yeah, and the good news is Texas has played far better at home than they have on the road. And looking at the rest of the schedule, they have TCU, then they have at Kansas, then they finish off the regular season against Baylor. The good news, the best news probably for Texas is they are not in contention for a bowl eligibility at this point. And that's something that is a step forward. It's a step in the right direction. It was something that did not happen last season for Texas. So that in itself, as minor as it probably sounds if you're a Texas fan, just because it seems to be the norm. And if you don't make a bowl game, then you're in trouble type of thing. But it really hasn't come easy over the last decade for Texas to secure bowl eligibility, especially at the start of November and not be fighting for it late in the season. That's a plus. And the fact that Texas is still in contention, I still can't believe I'm actually saying this, but in contention for the Big 12 title, that remains there. But as you said, it starts next week against TCU. This TCU team is going to come out, firing on all cylinders. This is a program that, I mean, even when Gary Patterson was the head coach, he would kind of, instill in the players like, this is the team that didn't recruit you. There's a lot of players from the state of Texas on TCU's roster, and they overlooked you. And so that's why I think TCU always had, came out really firing when they do play against Texas. But this is a different TCU team than what you've seen in recent years. I mean, so much credit to Sonny Dykes, honestly. I mean, I definitely did not think that we would be sitting here thinking like, I wonder who I'm going to pick, Texas or TCU, prior to the season under a first-year head coach, after getting rid of, a legendary head coach that really brought TCU football to prominence. So still a lot ahead, but you've got to take your wins when you can get them. And I will say one thing, when we're talking about like the players fall off, quote unquote, in the second half, I really feel like the blame starts with Steve Sarkisian. Like I'm not going to sit here and blame the players for this. The reality is this is still a pretty young Texas team offensively, I would say. Quinn Ewers is a redshirt freshman. The leading receiver, Xavier Worthy, is still an underclassman. Jatavian Sanders, underclassman. They're both having great years, but still there's a lot of youth. The offensive line obviously is a lot of youth too. And he's got to be the one to really look in the mirror, in my opinion, more so than the players. Because I feel like if he's not putting the players in position to be successful, at the end of the day, the players can execute all they want. But if they're not in a good position, it's still not going to work. And so Steve Sarkisian really has to take a hard look at himself, I think. I do think it's a good thing that Texas is playing TCU at home, just because how much better it seems that Texas plays with their home field advantage or in a neutral, stadium like how they had against Oklahoma. But when you're facing this TCU team coming out, a TCU team that has trailed in a lot of games in the first half going into the second half and have come back and really just put their foot on the gas to come back and win a lot of these games. Texas is the opposite. I mean, the last 2 games Texas has played, they've scored 6 points combined in the second half of games, as opposed to being outscored by so they were outscored 17-3 against Oklahoma State, and then they were outscored tonight. What was it? 17-3 again. Yeah, so 34-6 in the last 2 games, and then I mean, in reality, if you take the OU game out of the mix, Texas has scored 3 touchdowns in the second half against Big 12 teams. The OU game, and even with the OU game, pitching a 21-0 shutout in the second half of games, Texas is still being outscored by opponents 57-84 in the second half of games against Big 12 teams. You can't do that, especially against this TCU team. Something's got to change. It's got to change, and it's got to start with Steve Sarkisian, because what he does, as we've said, teams take on the personality of their head coach. Whatever he is doing is going to trickle down, whether it's on offense, defense, special teams, regardless. It starts with him and it ends with him. And you cannot afford to have this type of performance, I would say, especially when facing this TCU team that has been so dominant in second half of games.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Steve Sarkisian, the good news for Steve Sarkisian is he got the win in a hostile environment, Taylor, and the wind was blowing. It was kind of a carbon copy of Oklahoma State. It was a 20-mile-an-hour wind. It was a hostile environment. I mean, I was down on the field during pregame warmup. It was bonkers, and K-State fans were sensing something special after that 48-0 waxing of Oklahoma State last week, and so Texas had to, keep their chin up and stay positive and get it done, and they did. So the good news is Steve Sarkisian gets to try to figure it out after a win. But you're right, and this is a situation that is it's not, Texas is not going to get where they want to go if that trend continues, where they are gangbusters in the first half and limp home in the second half. And kudos to Sarkisian for having his team ready. They were sharp and dominant when they needed to be in the first half, and then made just enough plays in the second half, including that 55-yard punt by Daniel Trejo to pin K-State back in its own territory and have to drive the length of the field for that, for a chance to tie or go ahead at the end. And of course, Keandre Coburn with, slapping the ball out of Adrian Martinez's hands. Jalen Ford. What can you say about Jalen Ford? He leads Texas with 10 tackles, the huge interception that leads to a touchdown. He forces a fumble that K-State recovers, and then he recovers the fumble caused by Keandre Coburn. That kid he's a heart and soul guy, and he said he told the defense going out onto the field as K-State took possession for that final drive, it's on us. It's on us. Let's go finish this game, and they did, and that's a step. That's progress. It wasn't beautiful in any way, shape, or form, but it is a win, and for a team that has seemed to perfect coughing up leads in the second half, to avoid that and get out of here with a win is enormous. So let's see what this team can do. Maybe by clearing this mental hurdle, they play a little more relaxed in the second half of games. I don't know. It was crazy. The turnover, the penalties, and dumb penalties. I mean, pre-snap penalties, which are that's on the coach. And then, Jaron Thompson's personal foul after K-State had 1st and 35, for crying out loud. You give him a free pass with an absolutely stupid post-play personal foul. That kind of stuff just has to go away. So lots to work on for Texas, but they get out of here with a win, and it was huge. It was huge. Steve Sarkisian, I wrote in the Insider, I talked to a coach who knows Texas personnel, and the coach said, look, perception can become reality after a while. I mean, if you keep
Right.
losing the same way and no one else in the country is losing that way, then it's on you. There's something
Yeah.
wrong with you. And Steve Sarkisian was able to finally snap that string. But Taylor, the Texas defense is still giving up too many pass plays over the middle. Um, 10 to 20 yards down the field. So lots to clean up. But Texas gets out of Manhattan with a win. And believe it or not, Taylor, for those of us who've been around a long time and remember when Texas couldn't win in Manhattan to save their lives, Texas has now won 6 straight over the Wildcats and 3 in a row in Manhattan. Chris Kleiman is 0-4 against Texas. So,
And
how
mind
about
you, only one of those wins on the road at Manhattan happened prior to Tom Herman, right? Because Tom Herman won both
he
games
won both games in
on the
16
road.
and
This is
18.
number 3. So only one road win prior in the 15 years prior to Tom Herman taking over.
Yeah. How about that?
Yeah.
It was 2002.
Yeah.
So,
And Texas didn't play at K-State in 2005 or 2009 when they went to play for a national championship either. That was when, there was divisions, so they switched off who they played in the Big 12 North versus the Big 12 South. Honestly, I always joke that Texas, they kind of got gimmies there because of how poorly they seemed to play in Manhattan. That is like the 2 times they played for a national championship. In that stretch, they actually didn't have to play K-State, so that was a good thing.
well, big win here in Manhattan, Kansas. Thanks everybody for listening to our recap here on the Flagship Podcast of Texas's just enormous win. Wasn't pretty, but it was enormous to finally put um, the 5-game losing skid on the road. Uh, end that and not blow the lead again. Texas wins it 34-27 over K-State, and now we'll head back to Austin with a chance to really make it a signature win for Steve Sarkisian. This probably is inching closer. I think I said last week, Taylor, that he might need to beat K-State and TCU for Texas fans to feel like it's a signature win because of all the blown leads. But this was certainly a huge one for Steve Sarkisian in his second season at Texas. And now we'll see what he can do against undefeated TCU next Saturday night. And for Taylor Estes, I am Chip Brown. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com, where we have all the scoop for you. So we'll see you over at Horns 24/7. And until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.